All right, chat. Recently, Mr. Balltone has come out with a very inflammatory statement. Now, again, we've talked about how a lot of these larger creators tend to have larger takes because the larger takes inevitably get you 1.2 million interactions. I like to reference Tectone a lot of times because he brings up conversations. And to me, again, as a creator, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of how he goes about approaching the conversations. But, you know, again, the conversations are needed regardless. And he's the loudest in the room, right? If you think gacha content creators, one of the top 5 names at least has to be Tectone because of how influential he's in the gacha space. So let's kind of go through really quickly this recent tweets, kind of off the back of woo-wah, to be honest, but just as a reflection of his experience with Genshin. Even though I'm not even sure when's the last time he played Genshin, but anyways, let's take a look here. So firstly, Tectone says, a lot of people take offense to this, but if you disagree, you're 100% wrong objectively. It's asking for people to disagree. You know what? Maybe I should do this, chat. Maybe I should word my stuff more inflammatory. Being like, why am I trying to tiptoe around stuff? And why am I trying to add nuance to things when you could just, I mean, granted, talking about nuance, like there's a lot of stuff that he mentions here, which a lot of it actually I agree with, to be honest. But there are some parts where it's just, I do not. So Genshin Impact is a children's game and there is nothing wrong with that. To be honest, this is the part that I actually agree with. Of the many things said here, this part I unfortunately have to agree with. I think Genshin is a game that is generally catered towards an audience and a demographic that is much younger than some other audiences. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. However, it seems like you go into stuff that makes it wrong. I don't know. Anyways, Tectone, let's keep reading here. Genshin Impact is a very vibrant and colorful world, much like Fontaine, another game aimed towards children. Or sorry, Fortnite, aimed towards children. Agreed. Genshin is a very colorful world. They tend to stray away from the less colorful. And if you take a look at some of the stuff that has been less colorful, it's been less popular, right? Let's just can we agree on that? The less colorful portions of Genshin are the least popular. Enconomia, darker, chasm, literally in the chasms of the earth or of the world that is divide. Come on now. I love my little racist lamp in my kids game. That is correct, Merkel. Yeah. But here's the thing, right? And I've mentioned of a parallel to Genshin and why Genshin is so popular. Think Disney. A lot of its content, in particular movies, is catered towards children. However, as an adult, and if you grew up with Disney, you can start to see the nuance with a lot of the films and a lot of the stuff, which is why even some of the older folk, also, I really like the chasm. And again, this is not to say that you shouldn't like the chasm or you shouldn't like this or you shouldn't like that because the majority doesn't like it. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the majority of the player base, the millions and millions of people statistically generally don't like and have a worse reception to the chasm, to enconomia than they do of the more vibrant portions of the game. And that's just fact. The chasm, I think overall was probably my least favorite region, just overall, just did not like any aspect of the chasm personally. But and again, if you like the chasm, perfectly fine. If you like Dragonspine, perfectly fine. If you like Enconomia, that's amazing. That's why they have those portions. That's why they have those regions in the game. But to this argument here, right? The colorfulness lends to the explorability and the, you know, and the welcoming nature of those things, right? I love the regions most people don't like, and that's perfectly fine, right? Dora the Explorer, no Traveler the Explorer. They don't show any blood in this game. They don't show any real deaths. Sure, the characters evaporate like Senora, but it portrays death in a very child-friendly manner. Very true. If you take a look at Honkai Star Rail does unalive characters in some, you know, especially with Penacony, right? Just stab. But they also don't show any blood because it's all a dream. Those portions, they aren't, you know, they aren't afraid to experiment with, right? Which is good. Combat is very simple. You just match your favorite colors, blue and green, and make pretty flowers, wow, and boom, all the enemies are gone. Combat is very simple, and you just match your favorite colors. I feel like this is the first statement I'm highly disagreeing in. I think the combat is quite complicated. The tree in which you have to manage and the depth there is actually in Genshin actually exceeds games like Honkai Impact 3rd. However, Honkai Impact 3rd mechanically is a little bit more difficult, of course. But overall, I'd say that the systems for combat that they have in Genshin are actually more complicated than you might think, Mr. Tectone. Just because you have C6, you know, Hu Tao and C6 Ganyu, right? Like Tectone, he was a whale to begin the game, right? And if you were just free to play overall throughout consistently, then of course you'd see the game a lot more differently. But like you can't be a pay to win and then go back to say your F2P and then the game is still simple because you already paid for previous characters and supplies and resources that have carried you now to this point. So it's very disingenuous to say that combat's very simple because of that in Tectone's position. Right? And if he were to argue, oh no, I'm just saying in general, it's very simple. No, I don't think so. Can I say if you're whaling the game getting C6, you're just making the game easy. That's exactly it. Right? You're making the game easier for yourself because you're providing yourself with more resources for the game. Learning curve in Genshin is pretty shallow. Once you know the backs, the rest are pretty easy to manage. In some ways, yes. I wouldn't say it's more simple than some of the other games that are out right now. Like Wuthering Waves, like they make it pretty abundantly clear of like, oh yeah, you could just dodge and then you can use your, you know, you can flip into your characters and they have a skill. Just because the other characters have like more skills doesn't mean that the combat actually is more difficult. And just because enemies are stronger doesn't mean the combat's more difficult, or just because they can hit harder with numbers, right? Because right now in Wuthering Waves, you can walk up to an enemy that's level 80, right? When you're level 2, right? And that's just what the open world aspect lends itself to. So Wuthering Waves, even though the combat is quite fluid and I love the feel of the combat, and the combat, you know, is a very strong selling point of Wuthering Waves, it's not terribly much more complicated than what we've seen of other games like Punishing Grey Raven and even Honkai Impact 3rd. What, I have to press one more button? T? That's it. They literally have a skill, maybe a secondary skill, and then a burst. Wow. Not like we haven't seen that from other games already. So it's very, very peculiar why we point out that the combat is simple. Anyways, the mini games events are quite literally Mickey Mouse Funhouse puzzles. That is true. I have to agree. They're Mickey Mouse. They're I wish that the game would focus a little bit less on mini games and more on permanent content. But that's my personal preference. You know, Genshin has always said that their mini games are going to be some of the biggest draws of, you know, their weekly rotating content. We even have kids in the community who still believe in their imaginary friends who can't tell that their waifus or respondos don't exist in real life, just like in foster homes for imaginary friends. First off, I love Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. I love Blue. That's my homeboy. But what are we talking about here, dude? What are we talking about? People like to use MC as a self-insert because as kids, you'll have social anxiety and you probably don't speak up in real life when the grown-ups are talking as well. The grown-ups, like Diona and Nahida. I mean, Farina's kind of a grown-up, but not really. There are literal teenagers and kids in this game too. And in Wuthering Waves, when's the last time I heard Rover speak? I feel like the Rover has already spoken more than Traveler. Oh, that's fair. But that doesn't mean that the Rover necessarily has complex thoughts just because they speak more. And I'll be honest, even in some instances, when it comes to the Trailblazer in Honkai Star Rail, right? Just because they speak more, you got to remember in the story, canonically, the character was born yesterday, was born from Kafka to literally hold the Stellaron and just poop down onto the spaceship. Okay. There's awesomeness running in the entire game because obviously we don't want kids learning those words. Very true. Some of us believed it was a game for adults with the promise of challenging endgame content, but unfortunately we were lied to in every combat scenario and are just bully sponges just to test to see if you spend enough money for from your mother's credit card yet or not. This is the crazy statement. This is the statement I really wanted to highlight and I really wanted to dissect. Some of us believed it was a game for adults. When I play Zelda, all right, Legend of the Kingdom, or when I play Zelda, what's the first game called? What was the first game? Breath of the Wild. There we go. Sorry. When I played Breath of the Wild, I didn't think, man, this is such an adult game. Granted, that's not the best argument against that, but when did this game ever advertise that it was for adults? Never. It was always advertised as a game to be enjoyed by younger audience. It's not to say that like 2-year-olds will enjoy this game. Don't compare this to Nike or Azure Lane, or sorry, Nikkei. Nikkei and Azure Lane are definitely meant for a more like 16 plus audience. This game, I would say, is like 14. Honkai Star Rail, at least 14, if not 16. I mean, there's some aspects that are like, oh, you know, you don't really want to show that to your kids, I guess, but you know, for the most part, it's fine, right? Zenless Zone Zero, there used to be swearing. There's no swearing anymore. Because again, if you want to cater and provide your content to the widest amount of audience, all right, just because it doesn't have swearing doesn't mean it's not an adult game or that it can't be for adults. And Genshin Impact and Hoyoverse were pretty transparent in saying, and not necessarily saying directly, but they weren't actively promoting that this game was for adults. So this argument is very, very presumptuous and coming from a place of potentially their own bias, because this game was never, you know, created with the intent to be for adults only. And combat scenarios are just bullet sponges. I'll have to agree on that, to be honest. That like most of the stuff at this point are bullet sponges. However, when it comes to players who have not yet reached AR60 and don't have, you know, all the weapons and don't have all the characters, combat can actually get kind of difficult. It can get a little bit difficult. They had characters like Mona, Jean, and Amber that had some skin showing and decided to cover them up to not influence on kids that play the game. That's more of an Asian, more specifically Chinese request, you know, from you know, the Chinese audience and their culture, because this is a Chinese game. There's nothing wrong with the game being for kids, but we have to at least acknowledge that it is indeed a baby game. This game is not intended for babies. This game is intended for a young audience that can still, you know, be able to critically think. Meanwhile, League is PG-13 with a lot of swearing and extreme skins. This game is not necessarily a baby game, because there's a lot of complexity and a lot of depth into it, right? You take a look at the lore. Babies aren't going to understand the lore, right? Tectone, when's the last time you actually read the lore in Genshin? All you do is just react to others like Minsley, Verashikai, or any other lore streamer who do the work for you. So in that way, instead of it being a baby game, maybe you're the baby. They even said they won't make any more endgame due to the fact that it might give players anxiety that when they finally announce 2 years after that post, they will complete a thought that make endgame more restricted to trick kids into spending more money. I would have to say that the Spiral Abyss, you know, to some degree, I do agree with that, but it's not as he's making it sound more inflammatory than it actually is, right? Because the Spiral Abyss is used to incentivize, you know, certain play styles and certain, you know, gameplay mechanics, right? So it's not to say that I can't beat, and you said more restrictive, but you can still beat everything with Hybrid Bloom. So what are you talking about, Mr. Tectone? What are you talking about? I can just waltz up to the Spiral Abyss with Kuki Shinobu, Barbara, Dendro Traveler, and Kale. I could wipe them out of the floor. And then the other side, I'll put Bennett, Shincho, Xiangling, and another character. So what are you talking about? So like literally in this post, we have its own cartridge. What, hello? Anyways, just thought it was important to share. And if you don't believe me, let me provide a quote from the employees themselves. Yes, we made this game for kids and stuff. Mr. John Hoyoverse. That doesn't mean this is a baby game, dude. In conclusion, Genshin Impact is due to its simplistic storyline. Yeah, talking about samsaras and, you know, timelines and concept of time space is it's for babies, man. Accessible gameplay, that's true. I'll have to give them that. Cute art style, I'll have to give them that. Social features, give them that. And monetization models, predatory monetization models, I will have to add. You know, whether we like it or not, you know, gacha are, you know, the whole point is to feed into the FOMO. And that's the model, right? It may not offer the same level of complexity and challenges as other games on the market. It is an excellent choice for new players who are just starting the game. I agree. As such, Genshin Impact is not suitable for adults. Very true. You know what? I'll have to agree. Yeah, if you're looking for blood, gore, your game having to deal with that stuff, and that's what I'm assuming you're talking about, because this game literally goes through so many different philosophical and moral dilemmas, right? We literally, like I said earlier, from the Sumeru timeline, we were exploring, and we are about to explore very, very soon as we talk about samsaras closer towards, you know, the Conrian storyline, about different higher concepts of time. But it seems like every time he shows up to say something mostly bait, or we just aren't playing the same game. Maybe it's just me. We aren't playing the same game because he hasn't played the game in about a year and a half. So what is he talking about? Yeah, true. I don't know if a child would be able to fully comprehend Genshin Impact, and that's where you lose me. I agree. Between the really dark themes and storylines, just the sheer amount of reading to truly grasp what's going on, I don't think most children will be able to really get the full depths of the story. And yes, Paimon helps you bring along you with the very bare bones first level of the storyline, but there's a whole other iceberg that you're missing. That just happens to be within the nuance of you exploring more. Which when's the last time Tectones actually explored the world in Genshin? This man's just doing it for publicity, but again. This, and it's not to say that Tectone's views are 100% wrong, because there are a lot of portions where it is, I'd say this game, is made for a younger audience, and I have to agree. And granted, I don't have motion on Twitter, so, even if I say something on Twitter, it's not really going to pick up much. I'm not saying I 100% agree or disagree. Genshin is designed to attract a wider audience as possible. I agree, including children. But for those interested, Genshin actually has a very dark lore. I think Tectone brings up many good conversations and tends to lead the conversation a lot because he is a person of great influence, right? And there's a reason why he's influential, because he's very entertaining. The people who agree with his takes are plentiful, right? And there are some things where I'm like, oh yeah, I watch Tectone stuff too, but I don't know, man. Yeah, this is just how he makes content. He's a perfect example of the worst parts of the Genshin community is it is people around Genshin and not the Genshin community itself. I agree. Agreed. Because, to be honest, without Tectone breathing down our backs, Genshin's actually pretty fun. You know what I mean? When we have the leaders in Genshin Impact do what they need to do. Also, Nanomations, thank you so much, dude. Right? When we have the Doros, Brands, Minsleys, Johns, even still like the even larger creators like Dish or Atsu, and Anthony Chen and Ziox and that stuff. The game's pretty damn fun, and everyone tends to seem to enjoy the game pretty damn well until Tectone brings something up, and then people, the loud minority who hate on Genshin, this is where they get their voice. There's some people to shit on the game for us to be aware the game's not perfect. Agreed. And it's not to say that those people and those voices aren't needed, right, in the community, right? Because if the game didn't have voices, I guess, like Tectone, and didn't have voices, from other competing things, Genshin would just stay, at the level it was, which wasn't honestly very good. Genshin's release, to be honest, for how monumental it is, the game has gone quite a bit better, especially from its 6 months out release. After Lantern Rite, the very first year, Lantern Rite was amazing, such a galvanizing event, right? And then you have the release of Inazuma. People pretty Sumeru didn't have the greatest release, but Fontaine had a really, really strong release, right? Very interesting conversation to have. I hope that you guys got a lot out of it, in particular, because having these types of conversations is healthy until some people start swinging, which is not good. Again, there's a lot to agree to disagree on. Gaming, I apologize for going a little bit too over in that aspect on kind of dissecting that a little bit, but yeah, that was just a bad take. That is not a good take, man. Let's say that anything about Tectone, but the take in particular, did not like it whatsoever. And looking at his experience with the game, it just doesn't line up properly at all. So